Very excited to bring you this first episode of Shooting Stars Live, starring our first guest on the pilot, none other than Mike Martin, aka MathasGames. For those of you guys who don't know who Mike Martin is, he built his YouTube channel playing survival indie games, but after there has branched off and become a well-known variety Let's Player. Super excited to bring him on the show today. Mathis, what's going on?
Here? Am I live? Am I around?
You're live. I'm going to fade out the music here. What's going on, buddy?
Not much, man. Thanks for having me and my amiibos up on the show.
Hey, super excited to have you here, man. I just want to make sure that we are good to go. Can everyone hear Mathis? All right, I think everyone can hear Mathis.
Live troubleshooting.
Live troubleshooting. Yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning into this pilot episode of Shooting Stars Live. For those of you guys that don't know what it is, the best way to describe it is one part interview show, one part game show. And Mathis knows nothing about the latter part, the game show part. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. But let's go ahead and get started, Mathis. So, Mathis, I gave you a little bit of an introduction. We're going to get more and find out more about you in just a minute.
How deep and personal are we going to get is the question.
We're going to get as personal as you're going to let us. How do you feel about that?
I'm an open book, sir. Ask all the questions.
I'm excited. I'm really excited, man. So... okay, so first thing I want to talk about before we get into you, I like to want to open the show with what's going on in the world of gaming right now. There's three trending topics that I found that were pretty interesting that I wanted to get your take on. All right, so the first one is John Romero, the legendary creator of Doom, released a new level for the game decades later since release. What were your thoughts of that when you first heard about it?
I thought that was cool. I mean, I'm not one to have gone and played it because I wasn't a huge Doom guy back in the day, but I'd be interested to see the level just because you take an art that, you helped create 20 years ago or 17 years ago or whatever it is, and to revisit it and with 17 years of experience behind you to see what the difference is to what kind of level he would have designed nowadays if this was the game that they were just developing. I'd be curious to see just kind of the creative process behind that. I will actively say I will not go and play it, though, because I don't care that much to get it installed. But from a creative standpoint, from somebody who's gone back and looked at his old works as far as YouTube is concerned and looked at my old videos and been like, oh, my God, that's horrible. I'd be curious to know his thought process behind making this new level, this far in advance or this far after the game came out.
Were you surprised at the amount of press and attention it got? I mean, because we're talking about a game that was released, decades ago.
I mean, not really, only because Doom is it set the standard for first-person shooters back 17 years ago. It was one of the first to do what it did as well as it did it. And he's kind of a legendary name in game design. So for him to go back to what most people consider a masterpiece or a classic and do something new with it is exciting either way.
Awesome. All right. So, yeah, I mean, I just found it fascinating that, he would go revisit it and then still generate that much buzz. And I guess, you mentioned about going back and watching your old YouTube videos. You know, I guess that would be the equivalent of you going back and voicing over one of your first videos. Have you ever done that?
No. Well, what I did once was I did a reaction video of going back and watching some of my first videos and just talking about the mindset that I remember having, why I sounded the way I did. But I've never gone back and done a game that I did 4 years ago. I mean, outside of Project Zomboid, but Project Zomboid's an on and off thing for my channel since the inception of my channel, really. But I've never gone back and played a super old game that I commentated on. Just because YouTube gaming in general is very driven by games that are out now, the things that people are interested in now, and going back and playing an old game, you kind of have to have a very loyal viewership to do that. And I feel like I could, but it's not something I've ever really thought about doing.
Got it. Okay, so speaking of, games that are in the here and now, trending games that are coming out, what are your thoughts on, so The Witness release date was, released a few days ago, and the price point came out at $40 for those guys unaware, The Witness is Jonathan Blow's second game. His first game, Braid, was, critically acclaimed. It was a huge splash. And then here comes The Witness, and it's got a $40 price point. What did you think, and what were your thoughts when that came out?
I didn't have any thoughts. I was like, that's what he thinks his work is worth. That's what he should charge. I'm more surprised, and I was talking about this with Ryan a lot, for the Northern Lion, for those who don't know, on Twitter and on Skype, and I'm like, the thing that blows me away is that there's even a controversy around it. The fact that this guy, there's in the indie scene, there is this new like race to the bottom, right? How cheap can you make your game? How cheap can you set your price to be competitive? But if he thinks I mean, he invested all of the money he made from Braid and then plus some into his new game. If he thinks his game is worth $40, then it's worth $40. There are shorter experiences that we've paid 60 for on just generation of consoles. The fact that so many people want or are creating this controversy around a price just drives me nuts. I'm like, who cares, man? If it's an 8-hour experience, 6-hour experience for $40, that's what it is, and that's what he thinks it's worth, and you'll buy it or you won't. It's not like he's charging $100 for this game.
Do you think any of the pushback about the price point is due to his personality and how he's kind of handled himself online, or you think he would get it regardless?
I think he would get it regardless. I think in this climate right now, just because of, like I said, there's this weird race to the bottom when it comes to pricing your indie game. The fact that he's kind of done the opposite is, it's taking people by surprise, I guess. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think, I follow a lot of people, a lot of game developers on Twitter, and just watching them talk and then watching the games press talk. It's really kind of a wildly two different worlds. And a lot of indie devs are like, who cares what he prices his game? If you want to get it cheap, there will be sales in the future and stuff. Why start cheap? Because if you start too cheap, you can't raise the price thereafter. However, if you start too expensive, you can always knock the price down in the future. I'm surprised, and I guess a little miffed that the games press, the games media, is trying to make a controversy out of this when there shouldn't be really anything.
So you mentioned it twice. You said the race to the bottom. Can you expand on that in terms of games that have maybe pushed that?
The race to the bottom is just this idea within the indie game industry, is that you're only going to be a successful indie game if you price your game as cheap as possible so many people can get it, because that's all you're worth. You're only worth, like pittance at this point because you're an indie. You don't deserve to charge more than $10 or whatever. So you see a ton of indie developers just kind of pricing their game so low that they don't make any money off of it. They don't make no big bang for their buck, and they end up losing money on it because they ended up charging too little. It's just a running theme within the industry the past couple of years that I hope goes away, because there are games out there that deserve to charge $30 for their experience. It's crazy to see, whenever somebody it charges like $30 for an indie game, the backlash that they get, it's so stupid. It's not deserved.
So throughout the show tonight, we're going to put you on the spot, and this is probably the first time. You mentioned that some indie games have been overpriced, some have been underpriced. What's one that you felt that was severely underpriced that you're like, I would have paid double or even triple for that game?
There's a lot of games that are like that. I mean, right now, let me take a look at the price of a particular game right now. It just came out. Nuclear Throne is what, $12? Mm-hmm. That's a game that I would pay 15 for. Like, it's $3 extra. You'd be like, it's $3 extra. That's no big deal. But when it comes to profit, that's huge. Like, that's a lot of money over the course of hundreds of thousands of copies sold. I'm not saying Nuclear Throne is underpricing themselves because it's only $12, but I mean, would you have you played Nuclear Throne?
I have.
Would you pay $15 for Nuclear Throne? Because I think it's well worth $15, $20.
Yeah, I don't think it's that much of a stretch. It seemed like you can play that many, many times and you get some value out of it, depending on the style of game you like. So let's go on the flip side. What's an indie game that you felt was grossly overpriced?
Every goddamn early access game that's ever come out. There are some early access games that drive me nuts, and so, before I go on my rant about this game, you have to understand there's been beef between me and this particular developer that I'm about to bring up, only because I was so vocal about them overcharging their game. And their game has been canceled, and I've talked about it, he's talked about it, it's over, and he's working on another game right now. But The Dead Linger was a game in early access that was charging an arm and a leg for a game that barely did anything. It was a barely working, barely functioning piece of hardware that they charged $19.99 for in early access, to the point where over the course of 3 years, no significant progress was made, and they actually just had to cancel the game outright. And no refunds were had. It was just over. It had a successful Kickstarter of close to $100,000, and then it sold X amount of copies over the course of 3 years. And the game never got any better, but they still charged $20 for it the whole time, and it was way overpriced.
So during this 3 years of development, I'm guessing you had an eye on the blog or whatever they used to update. At what point did you get involved in being vocal about what was going on with the Dead Linger?
The first video I did on the Dead Linger was, and I can tell you exactly when I really, really got involved. Was, let's see, I did 4 videos on it, and the first one was October 1st, 2013 is when it came out. And this was when it was like fresh on early access, and there was still some hype behind it. There were mega problems with it. It was kind of broken. They were basically reaching further than they could accomplish. But there was promise there, and I was like, all right, this is maybe something can come of this. I did another one, but I criticized how broken it was and how much they were charging for it. Then I did another video 2 days later because the video had seen more traffic than my channel had really seen at that time in my channel's life. So I did like kind of just a general breakdown of my thoughts on early access and all this other stuff. Did another video January 12th of 2015 where the game had gone through 2 engine changes at that time, I believe, and was significantly worse off than it was at the time that I had looked at it prior. Then I did another one on August 1st, which was really close to them closing down the program after they had changed from their one engine to Unreal 4, and it was just an even more broken mess, and that was the last I did of it. I was following that game pretty closely.
So, I mean, they're talking about changing engines. Most games don't do that one time, and it sounds like they did it many times. So what was the tipping point for you? You know, before I want to circle back here to our third topic, but what did you say that invoked some sort of passionate response from the devs? Because I'd imagine there's something that you said or tweeted that showed up on their radar. I mean,
yeah, so every video I did showed up on their radar. And again, it was nothing personal. That was the problem. They took it personal because I was critiquing what was available now and what they were charging for it, and I was kind of talking about possible mismanagement, this, that, and the other. Again, it's a business, and my job as a YouTuber is to entertain and to inform. I kind of do both. And I had said things like, I don't believe they were experienced enough to try and do what they were doing. Their initial promise of the game was an Earth-sized, randomly generated world with like wildlife functionality, zombie roaming hordes, multiplayer, player building, like everything you could ever want within a dream game was presented in this Kickstarter. They started an Ogre. Ogre is like a really kind of bad engine to use for that kind of thing. It's basic. They went to Unity. They eventually scrapped the randomly generated world. And like they basically started cutting their promises. Like, we can't do this. We can't do this. They just didn't have the ability. Eventually, excuse me, people started getting pissed about it. And I started just saying things like, you know, I think maybe they overreached. They maybe aren't as skilled as they need to be for this particular thing. Rumors started coming out from ex-employees that were fired, that they couldn't be paid, that there was massive mishandling of the funds themselves. And again, this is all, of course, hearsay and from possible ex-employees and whatnot. But all that started coming out and causing huge controversy. So when I did another video on it, of course, that's all in the forefront of my mind. And then looking at the game and seeing it really hasn't progressed in a year or two, I just started saying basically what I was calling it. The game was broken. It was buggy. It barely functioned. It crashed often. The options didn't work. And I started saying things like maybe they just don't have the skill to pull this off. And that, I assume, kind of pulled their ire because they called me out multiple times, both on comments in my videos and, of course, on their website. And again, I know it sounds like, you know, maybe I was being a little too personal, but I really wasn't. I've said, like, I've torn apart indie games before that have been complete trash, but they weren't happy with it.
From what I remember, because I remember when this was going on and, you know, you had mentioned some things on Twitter, I looked at the blog post, and wasn't it kind of like not backhanded, but like a passive-aggressive mention of you that was, like, it could have been no one other than you they were talking about?
Well, they said my name. In the blog post, they said, and this, and I'll talk a little bit about why, you know, it bothered me a little bit, and why they seemed a little sketchy. So basically what they did, that blog post was the last blog post about like an update in the game that was going to happen before the game, they cut the ties with the game. The end of it, they said there's enough issues for Mathis to make like 3 more videos on this game if he wants. And I was like, all right, no, that's unnecessary, but that's fine. My other concern, my problem was so they switched to Unreal Engine 4. Now, I don't care if you barely know what you're doing or you're a talented, developer. Screenshots from Unity, the Unity engine, and from Unreal Engine 4 are going to be vastly different. Unreal Engine 4 is always going to look 100 times better than Unity does. It's just the facts. Unreal is a better looking engine. So they ended up switching all of the screenshots that were on the store page from their Unity screenshots to the Unreal screenshots, and basically changed how it all looked on the marketplace. 2 weeks after they did that, they announced they were stopping development of the game, and they brought the price from $20 to $5 and said it's an indefinite hold. We don't know when we're going to get back to it. But they left it up there for $5 after having switched all the screenshots to stuff that looked 100 times better. Now, when you boot the game up, it's a jittery freaking mess that doesn't work like 90% of the time. And people were pissed about it. But that seemed so scummy to me, and it seemed so suspect that there was enough of a backlash that a week later they just pulled the buy. The people were reporting the game, I assume. Eventually, the developers just pulled the buy button, and it's no longer for sale.
At the risk of not being self-aggrandizing, how much responsibility do you feel for the path that they took with their game in terms of how they treated the consumers?
How much responsibility do I take?
Yeah, I mean, without being self-aggrandizing, do you feel
None.
like you impacted that?
I don't think I impacted it. I don't think that game was ever going to be what they wanted it to be.
Okay, so
that's all.
Okay, so flat out. So let me ask this from the developer standpoint. Outside of fixing their broken game, how would you have wanted them to approach you to perhaps like mend a bridge for them? And I know that's not your job. Like you said, your job is to entertain and inform. But how could they have approached it with you to kind of make right, or at least put a Band-Aid on it to save the game?
Just acknowledge the problems. Like, instead of just everybody is guilty of this in some way, especially when it comes to social media. But like, the problem is the developers were knee-jerk, like very knee-jerk about it. Instead of and either not saying anything or acknowledging the problems and say they're working on it or whatever, just be cold cut. There was knee-jerk, like, emotional responses, blaming other people, not blaming themselves for just not having the skill to do it or whatever. And the way I watched the developers is it was always someone else's fault. It was always someone else's fault that the game was a piece of crap, basically. And it was never their fault. If they had acknowledged it or done something to acknowledge the fact that the game was clearly not becoming what they wanted they did at the very end, by the way, the very end, when the game was already canceled. But during development, if they had at least acknowledged it, maybe had a PR guy do something or just avoided social media altogether, then we would have been in a better place, I think. But instead, it was always just like emotional response, and it caused a lot of problems between the two of us, but just him and the community. Like, it wasn't just me. The community, if you go into the Steam forums, you could see him just arguing with the community constantly in the Steam forums or on his website or on Twitter. It was always arguing, and it was never their fault, always their fault.
Got it. So from a game that didn't work out to our third topic in the trending 3 to a game that's going to probably help a lot of kids. So I found this very interesting, and I wanted to hear your take on this. So Minecraft Education Edition, they saw that. They made that announcement. And I
don't know anything about it, to be honest.
Okay, so you don't know anything about it. My question for you is that, okay, so now you can assume what it's going to be. That what it is that it's an edition of Minecraft that is going to come with lesson plans for teachers. So a teacher, being a former teacher, you sign into the website and here's everything laid out. Here's how you can teach your kids X, Y, and Z through the game. So my question is to you, and we're going to get into your upbringing in a little bit, but what would your life have been like had that been available? Do you think anything would have changed had that
Probably
been available?
Would have been a lot better. I mean, I guess I'd want to see it in action first, because the idea of it sounds fantastic. And I'm sure it would be great, but for someone like me when I was in school, which I know you and I have discussed before, but I'm sure we'll talk about it in a bit, I was diagnosed early with ADHD, and I know a lot of people like that's an excuse to not do well in school, but unless you have it, you really don't understand how difficult it is. And at the time, we're like, to have a different way of learning that was more interactive probably would have helped me incredibly. So,
do you think it would have altered your your educational route that you've taken based on that? Like, would you have?
Maybe it's possible. At the very least, there's a good chance that it would have helped me do better in some subjects.
Got it. Okay. I just found it fascinating from the standpoint that here's a game that is essentially now being packaged for curriculum for education. You know, I found it was awesome, and I really wanted to hear your take because I know that you and I have similar views on education, and you know we're not going to get into that too deep, but we're more talking about your experience. But I just feel that it's something that it's cool and kind of bridges the gap between kind of what you and I do, more so what you do, and you know, like bringing it to young parents and things like that. So
yeah, I agree.
All right, so from trending 3 to now playing. So this is the last segment before we kind of get into let's get to know Mathis. What's been going on? You've had some computer problems today, which by the way is awesome. You got it up and running. But outside of that, fixing your computer, what have you been playing lately, both on your channel and then in your personal time?
So on my channel, I've got a bunch of things going on. I have Isaac, that's been a running thing for over a year now, at least one episode a day. I've been playing Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, which is an old 2004 RPG that is buggy as hell, but the community over the course of the 10 plus years have been continually fixing it and patching it. So now there's like an unofficial community patch that I use to play it that makes it not nearly as buggy. And I'm mad that I never played this game before because it's right up my alley. It's a fantastic RPG. I'm playing Punch Club, which I know you're also playing. Mm-hmm. And other than that, I have a little like one-off things going on. Like Crashlands is pretty fun, and I played Pony Island, which is nothing like you would expect it to be. And talking about it is a huge spoiler for why that game is actually pretty awesome. And I've been doing on and off Secret Sunday nights with Total Biscuit and crew, where we play Secret Hitler, the card game, and it's awesome. It's really fun.
Yeah, so I saw you tweet about playing Secret Hitler. I clicked on it for a second. I saw it, it was in Tabletop Simulator, which we'll get to later. But the name is enough to scare a lot of people away. Can you, for those of us that don't know what the hell Secret Hitler is, can you tell us
it's like a social engineering game. I mean, it's made by the same guy who did Cards Against Humanity, so the theme is not really surprising. So the idea is that there's two groups of people. There's the liberals and there's the fascists, and one person around the table is Hitler. Nobody knows who's a liberal. Nobody knows who's a fascist. The only people who know who Hitler is are the fascists, but Hitler doesn't know who the fascists are.
Okay.
The goal of the game is that there's two boards. You want to get either the liberals want to get their liberal card 5 spaces to the liberal victory. So basically, they want to get to the liberal victory ending, or they want to shoot Hitler. If they can figure out who he is and get the means to shoot him, they can kill him, and that'll win them the game. The fascists just want to get their fascist policies all the way to the end, and that'll allow them to win. Every turn, there is a president and a chancellor. So the president goes around, I think, clockwise around the table, and the president nominates a chancellor. Then the whole table votes on whether they want that president and chancellor to take power. If the vote is yes, the president and the chancellor then basically have to draw 3 cards, and they have to pass legislation that can move them one step along the fascist winning thing or one step along the liberal winning thing. If it doesn't work, the president then passes to the next person. He picks a chancellor. They vote again. The cool thing is that there are legitimate reasons why the liberals may want to actually pass fascist agendas, because every time it goes up a step in the fascist agenda, the president gets a power, and one of those powers is the ability to just shoot and kill a player of their choice. There's no voting. So if they figure out who Hitler is and they get the fascist agenda far enough along, they can actually just shoot Hitler and end the game.
Where does the influence come in? Like, where are you able to, what determines whether or not someone votes for you or not?
It's all about being able to lie really well, because you want everybody to think you're a liberal, because every time you play, there are always more liberals than there are fascists. So fascists are outnumbered. So the fascists constantly want to lie to gain the trust of the liberals, so that when they are put in power, they can pass fascist agendas. Another way to win too is for the fascists is if somebody becomes chancellor, somebody becomes president, and they nominate Hitler, whoever Hitler is, as chancellor. If that vote passes after a certain point on the fascist line, the fascists win. That's just how it works.
The game sounds oddly familiar, but enough of that. Let's go ahead
Oh, it's weird. Something about lying and manipulating other people to win a game.
It's
No
not-
money prize or anything, but just saying.
This show's all about you, Mathis. So let's go to our next segment. Get to know IRL. So Mathis, this is the segment where we talk about things that you may not have talked about, on your new YouTube channel or on Twitch, or things that people may not know about you. Some of these things, you and I are friends, so I know these things, but I know some other people don't. And so this is our chance, or your chance, to really share kind of the off-camera side, if you will, and really about your upbringing. So, and at any point, if you feel uncomfortable, just kind of give me that nod, or and we'll direct the interview. But
I lost virginity at the age of...
All right, so my first question kind of takes you back to your childhood. So where did you grow up, and did you stay in one area in your early years?
Yeah, I grew up in Rhode Island, a little town called Pawtucket. I was there for the first 18 years of my life, actually. So we didn't really move. We didn't move until I was 18. And then after that, we stayed within Rhode Island. We just moved to a different town. But by the time we moved, I was already in college. So my elementary and high school years are already gone at that point. So, all my friends were already made at that point. So it wasn't a big deal. So I didn't really, my home life was pretty stable in that regard, I guess.
So you grew up in Rhode Island, not Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I did not know
I
that.
did not. I live in Massachusetts now.
I didn't know that. So Pawtucket. All right. So for those of us that have no idea, so we go to Google Maps and we bring up Pawtucket.
Good luck.
Is it
nothing?
Is it a rural? Is it a rural area?
There are rural areas. Then the areas that get closer to Providence are a little bit more urban. The thing with Rhode Island is it's just a crap state. It's a crap state. It's what? Sorry. I'm just saying it's a crap state, man. There's nothing going on in Rhode Island. It's boring. It's in debt. I think it's one of the most in debt states in the country. It is what it is.
Okay. So you grew up in this rural type town.
Yeah.
What was your school experience like? Did you go to the traditional grade school? Were you homeschooled? What was your early?
As traditional as you could get. I did private school, so
Okay.
I was in Catholic school all the way through high school, actually, which surprisingly affected me more than I thought it was going to be once I hit college. So private school, I'm sure this is or at least my private school. So I started at St. Teresa's. I went to St. Cecilia's. Then I went to Mount St. Charles Academy for high school. And then I finally got out of that area and I went to to a public college. But it's when I hear about some of my now friends high school experiences, they're vastly different than my own. There are friends that I was yeah, we got bomb threats every so often in our high school. I'm what? How does that even happen? Yeah, somebody didn't want to go to school that day, so they called it a bomb threat. I'm that never would have happened at my school, which is crazy to me to think of it. I also it was predominantly white. Everybody within my high school, with the exception of maybe 10 people, were white. So that was a shock, not a shock in a bad way, obviously, but it was different for me going to college and being around much more diverse group of people, which I greatly prefer. Because when you the thing is that in these Catholic schools, at least the one I went to, especially high school, you still have bullies. The problem is you just have rich bullies, and rich bullies are just annoying. So getting out of that experience where everybody thinks they're the best of the best and they're elite because their parents have a ton of money or whatever, and getting into a real world situation and understanding how the real world operates was very liberating, and it was nice to have that change.
So you mentioned rich bullies with a certain I don't want to say fervor, but speaking from experience, did you experience bullying, and what was the first age that you had kind of?
I've been bullied. I guess this is I guess your typical story of your average YouTuber from what I understand. But for me, growing up, video games, anime, that kind of stuff wasn't popular. A lot of people weren't playing video games when I was 15, 16 years old or younger. So I was a big old dork. I was a big nerd. And that was just prime pickings for people to make fun of me for. And I couldn't do anything without being made fun of. There was, if I liked a girl, that girl would find out, and everybody would make fun of me for it. If they found out I liked a particular video game, they would make fun of me for it. If they found out I liked magic cards, they make fun of me for it. Got shoved in a locker once, like your typical bully crap. And I see the Bible thumps in chat, and it really sad stuff. But the other thing too, like, and I guess, and I'm sure it's similar for you if you were like that, but I'm 29 years old now. Looking back, it sucked because at that age, you have nothing else to compare it to. And that's like the worst thing that's ever happened to you. But without that having happened, I don't think I'd be who I am today. It very much formed my personality because instead of like giving in, I kind of used it. And, I had problems and I needed to talk to people for how much I got bullied and stuff. But I eventually turned it into a positive thing. One of the things I remember greatly doing in college was that, I hadn't really had a girlfriend ever. Girls weren't really interested in me. The way I dressed, I was the kind of kid who in college dressed in like the baggy pants and the black t-shirt that said stuff like, you laugh at me because I'm different. I laugh at you because you're all the same. Like that kind of thing.
Maybe you didn't know the girls were interested in you, but they really
right.
were, Mathis.
Well, the thing that I did in college, and I remember thinking to myself one day at home while I was just kind of doing work or whatever, was that I'm not going to be that nerd. Like I'm gonna be proud of being a nerd, but I'm not gonna let like that kill my confidence anymore. I'm gonna fake that I'm confident until I'm eventually actually confident. And from that point onward, I just basically, the saying, fake it till you make it. I just decided that I'm going to pretend that I'm confident and that, I can get whoever I want and I can do whatever I want. And then eventually I'll actually feel that way. It worked to the point where like the confidence and the charisma eventually did come. Like, I don't think I actually believe that I can do whatever I want. I can get whoever I want, but that change in personality because of how much I was made fun of to make that conscious decision drastically changed of how I was in the future.
So let me ask this: at what point, like when you were getting bullied, at what point were you like, okay, I'm not gonna like back down? Like at any point where you're like, okay, playing Final Fantasy is dorky, and I should try to do this. Like, where did that dilemma ever go through your head, or how did you be so steadfast back then? Because I see some people in chat saying like, hey, I'm in high school and this is like going on.
Yeah, honestly, for me, I was very lucky that I had, in particular, in high school, two very, very good friends that were there for me. One who is still one of my best friends to this day. I didn't go to school, I looked forward to going to school rather, not because I was going to get bullied and had to go to class, but every day after school. This guy, we would go and we would hang out in this very particular spot every day. We had our little bench outside that we'd hang out. We'd talk anime. We'd talk video games. We'd nerd out. I'd get my nerd out. And, I knew just because of him, like, everything was going to be fine. I wasn't alone, I guess, is the thing. And that was big for me, to know that I wasn't alone in my interests, in what I liked, that it made getting made fun of for it a little bit less worse, or a little bit better, rather. Because I knew there was a couple people that I could hang out with and talk games with and be a nerd about.
So how did you connect with that person? Like at what point were you like sitting in the lunchroom and you're like, you make an off-color reference to, like how did you guys be like, hey, you like this, I like this, but in this environment of like everyone's, is the opposite of you?
It was actually I had discovered that there was in our school a very small club, anime club, that would meet once a week for a couple hours, where a very small group of people would get together and watch anime together, and we could all talk about anime and all that other stuff. And I met him there, actually. We were talking about anime and stuff, and he was a year older than me. Yeah, some people in chat know who I'm talking about. Dave is like one of my best friends. And that's how I met him, and we eventually became really good friends. We eventually like had the same homeroom together, and we would meet up at lunch, and he was we were each other's, I think, like big focus for being like letting each other know, either subtly or whatever, that being a nerd is okay. And I know over the years like it's gotten better, but I'm sure it's still like a big point to poke fun at people for.
At any point, did you like like reach out to a teacher, or like, what did it ever get so bad where you're like, I don't want to go to school, or you just got to a point where like, all right, this is how it's going to be. I'm going to hang out with Dave at end of school, and it's going to be.
That's
okay.
really what it was. I never really. I mean, my parents knew and some teachers knew, but I mean, they couldn't. Nothing happened. I guess nothing really could be taken care of. I mean, I will say my mom was very protective of me. And like in elementary school, when she could watch over me, she did, as did my dad. But like high school is a different story, really. And there's nothing they really could have done. So for me, it was like Dave was just my out, and I was like, fuck everybody. Excuse my language, but F everybody else. I'll just hang out with Dave. And Pat was the other friend who I wish I still talk to. That was my out, my focus.
So I know this, but I don't think a lot of people know this. You said your parents were able to look out for you. How were they able to do that?
I mean, they did what they could. Like my dad is like, this is again, I'm trying not to get too detailed so I don't talk forever.
Well, that's why you're here.
Yeah, that's true. So my mom, in elementary school, like it's a much more closed experience, especially in a private elementary school. There's not a lot of kids, like it's a smaller scale. And my mom got involved in a lot of things that I did. And one moment that in particular I have a huge memory of was there's this kid, I can't remember his name. For the life of me, I can't remember his name, who was making fun of me or something. It was like at a school meeting or something where like the parents and kids would show up. And this kid thought it would be the funniest thing in the world that when I went to go sit down, he'd kick my chair out from under me and I'd hit the ground. And again, this is a kid that made fun of me regularly. So he did that, not realizing my mom was right there. And I hit the ground like hard. And all of a sudden, to see my mom like snap out and grab the kid by the shoulder and like lift him up and walk him over and like just like scream at him. So that she did what she could when they were there. And the other thing that they did too is they didn't discourage me from playing like video games and in my nerd habits. They encouraged me. I mean, there was times where I would obviously choose video games over homework, and they'd get mad at that and take away and ground me and all that stuff. But every Christmas I usually got the new system. My parents like basically went broke putting me and my two siblings through high school, because high school for private school, the school I went to, was like $10,000 a year per kid, which is a lot of money for three kids when two kids are in that high school simultaneously, basically. So they did a lot. They encouraged my habits and never said that I can't play video games, only nerds play video games or whatever. They were always there for me. I always talked to them. They were some of the most supportive people. Everything I did, they supported me. Back when I was trying to be a creative writing, like being an author, they were always interested to know what I was writing about. When I enjoyed anime or playing video games, they were always interested in knowing what I was playing. In particular, another memory I have is playing The Matrix Online, which was a terrible MMO, mind you. But I was the lead of the largest Merovingian guild on my server. And one of the cool things the developers did in that game was they would take over the main characters and do like story stuff. So I would get contacted by like Morpheus, right? And like he'd talk to me or threaten me because I was like an enemy or whatever. And I always thought that was like one of the coolest things. And my dad was always like, tell me what happened in The Matrix Online today. Like that. So that kind of personality, that kind of attitude really like maintained my passion for video games, because even since I was a little kid, I don't think people understand how passionate about video games I've always been. It's always been a part of my life since I was like 4 years old. And because of my parents, it's never really not been a focus of my life. And now I do it for a living, which is hilarious.
That's incredible that even you remember The Matrix Online and that impact that had. Do you remember the handles, or do you keep in touch with anyone from that? No? That's crazy.
No, I remember my handle.
What was your handle?
SYSOP. I was like system operator. Was like I took those two words and I smashed them together. Sysop was my character name. But I have no memory of any of the names on that game at all.
Did you have any family members that worked in the school system that you were in?
Oh, I should talk about that, huh? So that's another thing, right?
That's what I was trying to pull out of you.
So, but like, because I didn't think about it, because so my mom's was a teacher for a very, very long time, and actually is starting to teach again, which is awesome. But I was never really her student, because she jumped into teaching into the school that my elementary/middle school right when I was leaving it to go to high school. But in high school, I don't know why I didn't talk about it. My grandparents taught at the high school I went to. My grandfather taught chemistry, and my grandmother was my psychiatrist. Well, my step grandmother, because my grandmother also taught at that high school, but she died when I was 8 of cancer. Cancer sucks, friends, as we all know. So I just call my grandmother. My grandmother was my psychologist, or not my psychologist. What do you call it? What do you call it? The guidance counselor. Yeah. Guidance counselor. Yeah, my counselor. Which made things difficult for me too, because if I slacked off, or if like shit was going down in school, I would get basically, yelled at by her. I had my family breathing down my neck at all times, and the problem is, I was not a very good student, so I was always getting yelled at by my family essentially to do better. I couldn't do anything. Well, the test teachers would tell me do well on a test. If I didn't, get some, what do you call it? Uh-oh, is everything okay?
I think we're just got a little connection issue. Hang on.
Is everything better?
Yeah, I think it's slowly getting better.
Everyone says I'm turning into a potato. I'm sorry, everybody. Is it better?
Yeah,
my internet might just be shitting out.
I think it's better. All right, so you're saying so you weren't such a great student?
I wasn't such a great student. I had a hard time concentrating. I was terrible in certain subjects, but I couldn't get away with it is the problem. Anytime I did poorly, my grandmother found out, and it was just always a mess. There were plenty of times where it was like, there was this meeting room essentially, and it'd be my mom, my dad, and my grandmother, and then a long table, and around the table, all of my teachers for all of my subjects. And it was just like...
That's not a normal thing for a kid to have happen in school.
That was not... I just didn't do well. I was a bad student. But again, I talk a little bit about why is ADHD, because, man, if you have ADHD, it is freaking hard to talk about, or to learn, to keep your concentration. And I've tried to explain what it's like in the past, and I'll try and explain it again. The problem is... it takes, so like, I don't know what it's like for people who don't have it, but for people who do have it, to concentrate is actually very, very, like, difficult. Like, it takes a lot of effort, and I do mean like physical and mental effort, to not just completely let your mind wander and go down the 1,000 different avenues that it wants to go down. And the way, like, I dealt with it, because my parents at the time, again, this is like early 2000s, ADHD was kind of this thing where people saw it as an excuse, and I'm sure people still do, but people saw it as an excuse, and there weren't a lot of, like, real solutions for it. And my parents didn't want to put me on medicine because they just didn't want me to use that as an excuse for doing poorly. So they just basically said I need to figure out a way to deal with it. So my way of dealing with it was like constantly moving and fidgeting and moving my foot and doing doodles and stuff. That was the only way I could get my brain to focus. But it takes such a huge amount of effort, almost like physical effort, for me to concentrate and like listen to somebody doing math equations on a chalkboard and trying to learn it. And I always had reading comprehensions too, where I have to read things sometimes like 3, 4, 5, or 6 different times before I finally get it. And even then, I might not get it the best of my capabilities. So that, for certain subjects, destroyed me. Like, I just could not concentrate for the life of me. And I would have loved something like Minecraft, where I could do things and like let my brain just do a bunch of things, but all kind of come back to that one point of learning. It's tough. It's tough. Even today, like even now, and I'm sure you notice the way, and it's the way in my commentary as well, when I talk, it's very scattered. They all have a point. Everything has a point. It's usually tying into the same subject, but it can go down so many different paths. And I can just go off on tangents for no reason, because that's just how my brain works.
Well, I think that's why a lot of people enjoy watching and listening to, is because it's not, a typical YouTube route, or a typical commentary. It's exactly what you described. And so when you were dealing with that in school, like, did you feel like you were, like, when you say you didn't do well in school, like, what sort of grades would you get? Like, did you graduate? Was it a struggle?
I graduated. My senior year, I don't think I should have graduated, but one teacher took pity on me and passed me. My grades were freaking all over the place. That was the problem. Like some classes I'd get an A, some classes I'd get a D, some I'd get like a C, some I got like a B. Like there was the full gamut. It was different every semester. I mean, every quarter too. I get an A one quarter and then I get a C the next. It was my grades were just a disaster. They were everywhere.
So
I couldn't keep them straight either.
So you get through high school, and
Mm-hmm.
say that at that point, like, did things get better for you from a bullying standpoint? Did you make more friends in high school, or was it just kind of like, all right, let's get through and move on to the next chapter of my life?
For high school?
Yeah.
I mean, I had a couple big, like, really, like, there was a group of us that were very close knit, and it was like 4 or 5 of us total. And we just got each other through school, and that was the end of it. And then we went to the next stage of our lives. We kept in touch, but only really me and Dave maintained any proper friendship, really.
Okay. And I know one thing about you. I know some people do, and I just need to know where in the timeline it happened. When did you start getting into LARPing? Was it high school or after high school?
After high school,
Okay.
it was like late college.
Okay, all right. So we'll get to that in a second. All right, so you get through high school, you have a less than stellar experience. You learn that, you have ADHD, you're probably not designed to sit in a chair and learn in a typical setting. So you graduate high school, what decisions do you have? Is it like go to college? Is it go to work? Where were you at that point?
So at that point, I was already working.
Okay.
I was doing so poorly that, like, in high school, because I was just on and off, my family was just like, if you're not going to do well in school and you're not going to do any like extracurricular activities, you're gonna work. You're gonna do something so you have a skill. Say if you don't go to college, they have a skill that you can at least do something with. And my dad worked in the restaurant industry his whole life. And so he got me a job as a host at Applebee's back when I was 16 years old. I know you're laughing. I know why you're laughing. That's beside the point.
I'm not
So
laughing
16 years
because he was
old.
a host. I'm laughing because of a story I know about
Yeah.
him working at Applebee's. So if you're a host at Applebee's, that's not why I'm laughing. But go ahead.
I know. Yeah. So, at 16 years old, I got a job as a host at Applebee's, and I remember my parents driving me there for my very first shift, and my mom driving and my dad looking back and saying, "Remember this moment, because for the rest of your life, you will never not be working." I was like, okay.
That's some serious stuff.
But again, they as parents, they were very fed up because what are they going to do with me? I was not doing well in school. I didn't want to do anything other than play video games and go to anime club. I never left the house. Like, this was like their last ditch effort. Now, luckily, the restaurant industry is very hectic. There's always something happening. You're always doing something. And I excelled at that job. I was an excellent host. I had more money than any of my high school friends. I could afford things, and I got paid every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks when I got my paycheck. This is the extent of my responsibility, by the way. My parents were going to tell me to save my money. They said if I'm going to learn my way, so they let me do whatever I wanted with my money. Unfortunately, it meant I was broke by the time I needed it. So every 2 weeks, when I got my paycheck, my dad would bring me to cash it. I would take that money. He would bring me to Best Buy, and I would buy video games with all of it. And I would have no money left over until the next paycheck. And again, as a kid, you don't realize there's going to be bills to pay in your future, tuition, you eventually move out, this, that, and the other. You just think, I have money and I have nothing to do with it because I'm 15 or 16 or 17 years old. I'm going to go spend it. And I went and I spent it all.
Do you remember the first game you bought with?
I don't remember the first game I bought. Oh, no, I remember the very first thing I bought with my money, and it wasn't a video game. It was a $150 stereo system that I could hold like 2 CDs, and it was like silver and light ice blue. And I was a kid who didn't really ever listen to music, but it looked cool, and I wanted to buy it.
What CDs did you put in there? Like what was
I had
young
Smash Mouth. I had Will Smith's like rap CD. I was
Big
a kid
Willie style.
No, Millennium.
Millennium, okay.
Yep. Then there was, I went and bought Creed. Like, that's good. Nickelback, like, good stuff. Really good music choices. Linkin Park, which
Okay.
I'll hold to.
There's
which
some
is good.
redemption in Linkin Park.
I don't remember the first video game I bought. I do remember buying like certain video games. Like I remember buying like Ghost Recon for the original Xbox, and I bought I literally bought everything. I didn't need it, but I bought it.
All right, so I'm going to take a half step back. So you get your first job hosting. Like, were you a reserved kid? Like, or because that's a pretty you got to interface with a lot of people as a host. So what was that?
It's one of the reasons I think I'm decent at what I do now, because if you had met me back when I was in high school or college for that matter, or at least early college years, I was a much more quiet person. I was very shy. I felt uncomfortable in large groups of people. And don't get me wrong, I've said it 100 times and I'll say it again, but I think the restaurant has made me hate people in a different way. I don't like being in big crowds of people. It's not so much anxiety, it's just I hate people. It sounds mean, but I don't like being in the masses. Like a mass of people acts very differently than like a few people hanging out. Like there is a true mob mentality that takes over when there is a crowd of people, and I hate it. But yeah, I was a very reserved kid. And the restaurant industry forced me to be better about interacting with other humans. Hosting is not as intense as being a server, which at 18 they promoted me to server because you have to be 18 to be a server. You can't do it when you're 16 for liquor reasons. But it's still like the restaurant industry in general forced me to learn to talk to people. I can get a very quick read on people now. Like after talking to somebody for a few minutes, I can get a very quick read on the kind of person they are and how I should engage them to not either annoy them or, whatever. And it helped me find, I guess, my speaking voice in a way. And from that, like, I'm thankful that I worked 11 years basically within the restaurant industry, because it gave me, along with making the decision in college, it gave me a false bravado until that false bravado became actual bravado,
Yeah. No, I can see it's like where you are now. It didn't just like happen. It built over.
It definitely didn't. And it's funny because you can still go back and listen to my original videos, and I still sound bored to tears in every single one. But I think having the experience in the restaurant industry gave me the courage to start making videos in general. Because talking to somebody person to person is very different than talking to a microphone and having nothing but the game in front of you. So that boredom sounding isn't me being nervous. It's just awkward to be like that initial couple years of just being like, how do I make this entertaining? They make it look so much easier on YouTube. This is really weird. That was a different transition than what the restaurant just kind of, I can, even if I am nervous or I hate being around some people or I'm around people I don't know, I can still hold conversation with them and have and appear normal because of the restaurant. Because the restaurant industry, especially as a waiter, you're dealing with so many different types of people all the time. And you have to learn, like you might have 4 tables at a time. You might have one table that is incredibly talkative and loves to joke with you. You might have another table that wants nothing to do with you and just wants you to bring their food and go away. You might have one table where it's like just one, person, and they enjoy a little bit of light conversation, but they don't really want you to get too personal with them. They're alone for a reason. Like they want their alone time. And you learn to be able to bounce through all of those different personalities in the matter of seconds. And especially if the 4 tables are like right next to each other, you can be like, 100% on for this person and then be cold and only bring the food for this next person. And it teaches you that skill, which is really interesting.
Sounds a lot like reading YouTube comments, but
that's different.
so the next thing, so you're working, you graduate high school and you're working. And then at what point do you say, hey, I didn't really enjoy high school, so let me go to college? Because you went to, so when did that decision take place for you?
I went to college right away and I shouldn't have.
So where did you go to college at?
So I went to CCRI, which is Community College of Rhode Island, because I got denied to every other school I applied to, and that place can't deny you. I went there for...
You're just showing a lot of love for Rhode Island tonight, Mathis.
Well, I didn't have a choice. All other schools that I applied to denied me because my grades were terrible. And as someone with ADHD, can I just say SATs are bull. They're crap. I hate them. Because you sit still for 3 hours and take the standardized test and your brain melts. All right. I remember being finished with my SATs like an hour and a half before everybody else because I just rushed through it. I couldn't do it anymore. So my SAT scores were trash. So everywhere I applied, I got denied. So I went to the community college. I went to community college, and it was an experience. Again, happy I went, met a bunch of cool people, and that's kind of where I like I said, I kind of developed this charisma that I didn't really have. And I got introduced to a bunch of other nerdy things and this, that, and the other. But I only went for about a year and a half before I dropped out because I just wasn't doing. I was failing. I was just failing. It's bad too for someone like me who hates school to go to college where you're in charge of yourself because you just start skipping classes all the time. You're like playing a game of Magic, and then it's like I got to be in class in 5 minutes. Like. And people are just you're gonna like, but do I really want to get up from this table and leave these people and to play Magic without me? The answer is always no, you do not. So I just skipped class all the time. I didn't give a crap about it. Eventually I just dropped out because I wasn't doing well for, a bajillion other reasons. And I was going initially for history because history was the only class in high school that I loved and always did well in. It was also the only class that I eventually went to college for too. Like the only class I didn't skip was history classes. But I mean, history is one of those things. Like, what am I going to do with a degree in history? Work at a restaurant? I'm already doing that. I could change to something else, but nothing. I remember distinctly having a feeling back in high school and in college, like, what am I going to do with my life? And it was a stressful thought to constantly be like, I love history, but there's nothing I can do with it. What am I going to do with my life? I'm basically down this one track road of I can work in the restaurant industry or I can force myself to get a degree in something and hate another job just as much. And working in the restaurant industry, at least I knew I could make a livable wage off of it. And I was already in, and the constant stress of like, I hate everything. Like, and not like I hate life, but like I hate the idea of working in all these industries. The only thing I care about in my life outside of my friends is video games, anime, and Dungeons and Dragons. Like, that's the only thing I have any interest in. And people are like, you're depressed or whatever. And I like, the thing is, I'm not. Like, that was the thing people needed to realize. I was never depressed. I was just happy with these nerdy hobbies. And you can't get a job doing like D&D for the rest of your life. That doesn't work unless I wanted to open up a really super small gaming store that probably would fail, and put you even more debt because you have to take out a loan for a small business. The only thing I could think of was maybe at some point I can go to school for like video game design because that was the closest thing to what I enjoyed doing.